to protect the public, actually, from precisely that greed. We have a system now where we've seen all of these financial institutions able to merge, to mix different activities which had previously been separated. After the Great Depression, after the market crash of 1929, there was a shock to the system, and FDR passed a law called Glass-Steagall, which put up a firewall between investment banks and consumer banks. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so they said, if you want to be an investment bank, if you want to gamble and speculate and make lots of profits, you can do that, but the government won't guarantee the investments. That's your problem. Go play in the casino. If you want to be a consumer bank, if you want to be trusted with people's life savings, with their hard-earned money, then we will guarantee those savings. That's the deal that the public makes. But if we are going to guarantee those savings, you can't speculate. You have to be low risk. And there was a wall put up between investment banks and consumer banks.
That was when? In
1934.
34.
And the law was called Glass-Steagall. The law was ignored completely under Reagan, but it was still officially in place, but it was ignored as if it didn't exist. And all of these banks, like Citigroup, were able to be both consumer banks and investment banks. And then it was actually 1999, during Clinton, when they finally killed Glass-Steagall. And that was
the law was broken.
The law was broken. It was a Republican-led initiative, but the Clinton administration embraced it, and so now we see the problem. We see why that firewall was there in the first place. The problem that you have, an institution like AIG. They explained they had to save AIG because it would have had a domino effect, because AIG was an insurer, an investment bank, a consumer bank, a mortgage lender. It was in all these areas, right? Mm-hmm. But they're not re-regulating the financial sector. They're in fact allowing more mergers, right? Lloyd's has been allowed to buy HBOS. And in fact, what's interesting about that case is that Lloyd's has been trying to buy some of their competitors and for years now. And because there were antitrust laws that tried to block the emergence of banking monopolies, Lloyd's had been prevented. But in this crisis, Gordon Brown suspended the rules and let Lloyd's get even bigger, even more intermingled, and put people more at risk. Now all these governments are stepping forward and saying, we will guarantee, we will guarantee the savings of the public. So they're not regulating the banks. They're increasing the level of guarantee, which obviously increases the incentive to take more and more risks, but with all the risks in the public domain. So the public is subsidizing gambling.
So are you a communist?
Am I a communist?
Yes.
No, I'm not a communist.
So you think, vous pensez que le communisme n'est pas la solution? Parce que là, vous dites le capitalisme, c'est pourri, on en est un peu convaincu, mais il n'y a pas d'alternative. Donc comment...
I think there are plenty of alternatives. What this moment really lets us see is what neoliberalism is, which is a war against the gains, not against communism, but against the gains that were won by working people after the Great Depression. After that crisis, after that crash, there were many victories. There was a regulation of the financial sector. There was the guarantees of certain minimal standards and pensions, Social Security. Those public houses in New Orleans, those public housing institutions. This was not a communist system. This was a mixed economy, a Keynesian economy. The leftists in America were very disappointed with the New Deal because it didn't give them everything that they wanted. But there were enormous gains. And those gains really did make it less profitable to be a banker. Yeah, but I agree.
Very, that's why I was happy to see you. Qu'est-ce que les citoyens peuvent faire, selon vous? Est-ce qu'ils peuvent agir?
Well, they must. This is a moment where actually such bold intervention is taking place in the interests of the financial sector that part of what prevents people from acting is this idea that we are powerless. We're told this all the time. You know, basically everyone under 40 years old has grown up with the idea that the government is the problem, not the solution, that we're at the mercy of these global forces. And then suddenly...
Ils ont gagné ça, c'est vrai qu'ils ont gagné cette guerre idéologique.
They won that war, and now I would say they're still, that the same interests are still winning by getting huge amounts of public money to bail out the financial sector and to insure their risks. I'm from Canada, and you know, we have public health care. We have a national health care system. It's one of the things that makes us different from the United States. And we won that victory in Canada after the Second World War, precisely because people had seen the intervention of the state in a time of war and the enormous amounts of spending that went into building weapons and building armies. And so you had one politician in Saskatchewan, a man named Tommy Douglas, who said, if you can do this, if there's enough money to wage war, then there should be enough money to have health care for every person in the country.
Donc des gens comme vous, qui pensez que le projet collectif c'est mieux que le projet individuel, vous utilisez cette crise dans une stratégie du choc à vous. Il faut utiliser, nous aussi, la stratégie du choc, c'est ça?
I think crises are messages. Every crisis, certainly the crises we're living now, the food crisis, the oil crisis, the financial crisis, these are messages telling us that there's something wrong with the system. And what I show in the book, as I said, is that we have been living a strategy on the right to unmake the wins of the left since the Great Depression. And that was an example of a progressive shock doctrine, if you will. But it's different because the way the right uses crisis is to consolidate power in the hands of very few, to say we don't have time for democracy. It's a crisis. It's an emergency. I'm Henry Paulson. Give me absolute power. You can't contest any of my decisions in court. It's a strategy really to avoid democracy. I don't think the left should do that. And I think the left, historically, the far left, the communist left, has done that. I'm proposing a democratic response to these crises. And if we look at the way in which the New Deal in the United States was won in the 1930s, it was not this strategy of consolidating power and restricting the political space. It was a huge populist moment. It was the moment, it was the height of populism, which just means that it's popular, right? It's a dirty word now, but I don't think it should be. And it was a moment where you had a huge organizing of trade unions, of consumer groups, of renters. You know, the reason why we got public housing in the United States, the reason why Fannie Mae was created in the first place, is not because FDR decided that. It's because there was so much direct action and pressure. People were being evicted from their homes, as they are today, foreclosures. And neighbors would organize together into these solidarity groups. And when their neighbors' furniture was being moved onto the street, they would move it back into the house. They would take that kind of direct action. This was the sort of pressure that created a context where FDR could say to Wall Street, look, this country is moving so far to the left that we need a compromise, and the compromise is the New Deal. So I don't think that the left should be using the tactics of the right. And I think we should be doing something very different, which is opening up political space. I call it disaster populism.
Merci beaucoup, Naomi Klein. La gauche a du boulot. Ils sont en France, on est mal barré avec notre gauche, elle est malade. Ils pensent qu'à eux, ils ne pensent pas au pays, malheureusement.
Merci. I've noticed that. Merci à vous.
Merci, Naomi.